welcome to the Pajama Talk Show, where we talk about sociological things in our pajamas because it's cold and our apartment has bad insulation. So, I'm your host, Sarah Osmoon, here today with my two housemates, Kristen Wong and Harsimran Bandal. Today we're going to talk about how our different educations have shaped our dispositions and how we see the world. So, a little bit of background on us. Harsimran and I both grew up in Fresno, while Kristen grew up in San Francisco, and we've been pretty surprised by the differences between our schools to the point where I feel like it would be fun to talk about them sociologically. So San Francisco, as everyone knows, is pretty liberal. Fresno is much more conservative, and we're going to look at the differences in the environments and how maybe they've led us to develop different perspectives or values. And so I went to a private school in Fresno up until I attended the public high school that Harsimran went to, and Harsimran attended public school before he went to that public high school. So a little bit like just making sure that my private school doesn't skew everything. And then Kristen, you went to public high school before you went to public school before you went to charter high school?
Yeah.
Okay, so now that we've got the introductions out of the way, let's get started. The first thing I wanted to talk about was the way in which American history was taught. We've talked a lot about this and just brought up things that were like, wait, what? So the first thing I was thinking we could talk about was Indigenous Peoples Day, or as I call it, Columbus Day, because I had never heard of Indigenous Peoples Day before I came here and talked to Kristen. I was like, what's that? So can you explain a little bit about Indigenous Peoples Day to us and why, like, if your teachers gave any reason that they changed it, or is it just widespread throughout San Francisco?
Yeah, I think growing up, my teachers always told me to say Indigenous Peoples Day because it's a day where we're supposed to celebrate Native Americans and not Columbus. I think my teachers always just made it really clear that Columbus, although always widely celebrated and thought of as a hero in the U.S., isn't actually that great of a person. So
I see. Now, Harsimran, you had never heard of Indigenous Peoples Day before coming here, right?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I just thought it was kind of interesting because I also learned, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue and, everything was great, and it was a holiday, but we didn't get a day off of school, so it wasn't as good, but, it was still, yay! So I guess that was a bit of a different perspective. Another thing that I thought was interesting is how you learned about the 3/5 rule. You want to talk a little bit more about that?
Oh.
Where the slaves were counted as 3/5 of a person.
Yeah, I think you said that it was more of a fact for you, whereas for me, my teachers really emphasized that you were being treated as 3/5 of a person. Your opinion only counted for 3/5. And then he was like, how would you feel if you were only 3/5 of who you were? Yeah, which is interesting because my teacher was British.
Bad America. That is interesting. Harsimran, how did you learn about this? Was this significant for you, or did it just fall right into history, just going along?
When we learned it, it was part of when we were learning about American history. We learned that slaves were given, or black people were given 3/5 of a vote, but it wasn't. So we learned about it, but it wasn't it wasn't something that we focused on intentionally to emphasize the fact that they were given less rights. It was just like any other fact that you learned. For example, there's the American Revolution. This happened, and then there's this sort of dispute between, for example, the North and the South. But we never said that the 3/5 of the 3/5 rule was something super significant or something that was worth noting for inequality or something like that.
And I feel like a similar thing happened for the Trail of Tears, in my class at least. I do remember talking about it, and everybody agrees that it's terrible. But in the way that we talked about Andrew Jackson being responsible for it, I never saw Andrew Jackson as a
bad
particularly terrible person.
Yeah.
So now when they're saying, we want to take him off the 20 and put Harriet Tubman, I'm like, oh yeah, well, Harriet Tubman's great, but like, I didn't actually think that anything would be wrong with Andrew Jackson being on the 20. He was a president. He didn't get impeached, right? I mean, it was just kind of interesting to me. What did you learn about Andrew Jackson?
That he was a terrible person. Yeah, basically. I think my teachers really emphasized that history is written by the people who won. And in America, history is written by, I don't want to generalize, but white people. And so the way that our history book retells the history to us is very biased. So my teachers really emphasize that this isn't actually what happened. This is what happened, and this is what your textbook's saying.
I see.
Yeah, so in the beginning of the AP US history, did a lot of analysis on the bias of history.
And did your textbook, it matched what your teachers are saying?
No.
Or, no. Okay, so your teachers provided supplementary analysis to this history.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
We use the regular AP history textbook.
Okay, I see. Okay, well that's pretty interesting. Now I wanted to talk about the Civil War, just because I studied the Civil War a lot when I was in middle school. Watched like an over 10-hour documentary of it, but I feel like it was pretty glorified, I would say, in my class, just because we did talk about the issue of slavery, and we did talk about how there was a horrific loss of life. But when I really think about it, it was what do I remember? I remember this battle, these generals, what did they do to win and bring the Union to victory? And it's just kind of like an American hero story, Whereas I think you said that you focus more on the issue of slavery, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Simran, what were your perspectives on the Civil War?
Well, the Civil War, I think ever since I learned it was just because there is this difference between the perspective in the North and the South. I remember in middle school we learned about it was because there was the question of slavery and the North was against it and the South was for it. But then like in AP US, we tried to stay away from that idea of it was because of slavery, but more because of other factors. Like the South needed the slaves in order to keep their economy going. So it wasn't because they had this strong focus on we like slaves, but more like they needed cheap labor. And I think that's something we focused on AP US history versus high school, but it wasn't like the Civil War was this glorious moment where slaves were finally free. I mean, it was great in the sense that we learned about things like the Emancipation Proclamation by Lincoln, but we didn't talk about it. I don't know. It didn't seem like the Civil War. It always seemed like it was caused due to the issues in slavery. I didn't learn about generals, and it wasn't that wasn't my perspective. But I think I don't know. It still sounds different from Kristen to an extent.
Yeah, it may have had something to do with the fact that my history teacher was a Vietnam War veteran, so maybe he was particularly interested in the art of war. But one other thing is that do you remember pretty recently they were taking down a statue of Robert E. Lee in a public place? So I was actually kind of shocked by that too, because I knew that he fought for, I guess, what we consider the wrong side, the side that supported slavery, but I always learned about him this really respected military genius, and I never thought, wow, he is the worst person ever, we have to try to erase him from everything. Did you learn that he was just a terrible person?
I learned that he was a terrible person with a brilliant military mind.
I guess my teacher just respected him too much.
Yeah, so it was kind of like he used his powers for evil.
That's pretty good. Okay, so I think that overall, maybe American history was taught to me more in the lens of, I don't want to say America is great, but probably my classes masked the flaws of our history more than yours did. I would say that yours tried to bring out our past mistakes, maybe so that we don't do them again, or something like that. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. I don't know. It was interesting because I was taught by a British teacher
That is pretty interesting.
And so every time something went bad, we all kind of looked at him like, isn't this technically your fault? But yeah, I don't know. It was interesting.
That is pretty interesting. I feel like it's impossible to teach history without bias of some kind. So, yeah, I would say that any teacher puts their mark on, like, you know, what they teach their students.
And I think depending on your teacher, you definitely know what their opinion is based on how they're teaching you.
That makes sense.
But I also think it's really interesting how, like, we all get examined by the same exam, the AP exam.
That's true.
So, like, even though everyone has a different sort of instruction, they still try to, like, generalize it or standardize it in a certain sense by having us all take that same question of the Puritans.
Yeah, that's true.
About the Native Americans.
I did learn, I didn't particularly learn much in AP histories just because I learned so much in middle school from this Vietnam War veteran that everything that I used was pretty much from his class that I still remembered. But I think because we had the same AP US history teacher, right?
I had...
Did you have Lovin? No, Linder. I had Linder as well. Yeah. So we had the same AP US history teacher, but I think most of how I see history was shaped by middle school and what I learned from that guy. Yeah, so I feel like it makes sense for San Francisco being very progressive. Maybe it tries to, I don't know. And it's, your school was very diverse as well, so I think it makes sense to kind of promote inclusivity and equality in general and, you know, denounce the past racial injustices. It makes sense for me as in San Francisco. So now we're going to switch to a new topic. I thought it would be cool to talk about the social norms in our high schools. So in sociology, we learned about the concept of breaching, which is breaking social norms, and like people tried to restore order, I guess, after that. So I think the way that in which Harsiman and I were allowed to express ourselves with dress and language was pretty different than in your school, and I just want to talk about a few topics. So first one is cursing. So would you like to recount what your drama teacher said to you? This is terrible. But with a, you can say something else in replacing the word.
Okay, so I was just messing around in drama class. I'm a terrible actor. So he looked at me and he says, "Kristen, what the F are you doing?"
Wait, did he actually say the word?
Yeah, he said the word.
Oh.
I feel like our teachers might have been, I don't want to say they'd let them go just for that, but they would get seriously in trouble. Like, the administration would kill them. All it takes is one parent to complain, and that teacher is, like, almost gone, if not gone.
Yeah, I think it was interesting because the student-teacher relationship at my high school were, like, we were almost friends, but they were still, like, respected.
I feel like at our school it was not that casual. It was very much, teacher, all of you.
Yeah, because when he said it, I wasn't offended. I just laughed.
I don't know. I think it depends on the teacher.
It depends on the teacher.
Yeah, because like I had several teachers with whom I was very close, who I would see every morning.
That's true. But was that? I feel like those kinds of teachers weren't always like close to everyone. If someone were to, for example, like curse a lot in their class, I feel like, I don't know, they're supposed to get mad. I feel like most of mine would have gotten pretty mad and, like, I don't know, sent them to student services or something. I don't know. I felt that I never really heard a teacher curse in a significant way.
No, I never heard any teachers curse at my school.
No.
At our school.
Yeah, and I felt that if I did it myself, that would be, you know, pretty bad. So I didn't really start cursing much until I got here, and like my life was terrible. So now we're gonna talk about detention. Would you like to share with the world?
My high school didn't have detention.
I don't know how this is possible. Can you believe our high school didn't have detention? At our school, everything was detention. You're sleeping in class, detention. You don't finish your homework, detention. Literally, everything. You go in that person's classroom, or not, they had a set classroom every day for lunch where they would hold detention, and all the delinquents would go gather there in silence. And they weren't allowed to, were they allowed to work on things? I feel like Were they?
Yeah,
Okay.
sometimes if they didn't have work, they would give them work to do. And then it was after school for 2 hours, and then on Thursday...
After school for 2 hours? Oh, I didn't know about that one.
And then
God.
there was Thursday for 4 hours called Thursday school. And then there was also Saturday school.
Aren't you glad you didn't get Saturday school, you delinquent?
I never got in trouble.
So I feel like the Clovis North had a lot, or that's the high school that Harsimer and I went to. Clovis North had a lot of control over its students by means of detention or the administrators roving the campus. I'm going to talk about that a little later. So I wanted to talk about the dress code. Harsimer and I can list some various rules that didn't make any sense. So at Kristen's high school, students could dye their hair unnatural colors and have like nose piercings. Those were definitely outlawed at our school.
Could you show your belly button?
Yeah.
Yeah, they could show their belly buttons. At our school, I think the dress code might have been a little sexist. It was kind of like students can't wear anything that can be a distraction, but mainly it was girls can't wear revealing clothing that can distract everyone else. So no crop tops, no yoga pants, no shorts that are more than 6 inches above the knee, which that was a big one because in Fresno it's really hot and no one sells like attractive looking shorts that are lower than 6 inches above the knee. So, I mean, and the administrators would go roving the campus on golf carts during lunch with rulers, measuring girls' shorts. It was so bad. They said that students should look professional and you should maintain a learning environment. But really, I mean, there is stuff like the straps of your shirt couldn't be less than 2 inches wide. Mm-hmm. So there was no sleeveless, there was no off the shoulder. They had to be like 2 inches wide, and I don't know. To me, that's like kind of ugly sometimes, like depending. Yeah, it was kind of interesting. Like you wore yoga pants all the time. You could not do that at our school. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I pretty much always wore whatever I wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing I noticed is that the dress code reinforced the gender binary in a way. So guys couldn't have long hair. It had to be, I feel like it was like the collar level, and it couldn't obscure like half the ear, something like that. And there was one other thing. Oh yeah, guys couldn't pierce their ears, and I feel like none of these things are a problem at your school, right? Yeah, all of these things are allowed, which, I mean, I feel like we weren't really allowed to express ourselves through dress, and if you think about it, like, our changing times, and it's becoming more acceptable for people to dress however they want to match their, like, gender identity. Like, imagine being a transgender or like just not identifying in the gender binary, and I feel like that would have been a little soul crushing maybe.
Yeah, because I think, for example, like, you know, there are certain times during the year, they don't do it anymore, during the winter, where you were only allowed to wear pants, and then what ends up happening was girls could wear skirts, but guys could only wear pants, and so I think that.
Oh, so the no shorts, but you can still wear skirts. That is pretty interesting, actually. I didn't think about that.
Yeah. Yeah,
because I never wore skirts, but that's pretty interesting. Yeah, they had weird things like you can't wear flip flops. I don't know that your shoes had to have a back, but I think they changed that later. I don't know. That was kind of weird. I don't know. Guys couldn't have facial hair unless they had a religious or medical note. That was weird, but
I medically need my beard.
I think it's like you have sensitive skin and you can't shave or something. Or I don't know. Yeah, I think the school changed the rules a little bit. I think guys can have long hair now because I saw that one of my friends has a brother who still goes in that school district, and he does have like shoulder length curly hair. Yeah, oh. Daniela's brother. Oh. Wow. Yeah, I saw him and I'm like, wait, where does he go to school? How is he allowed to look like this? And yeah, so that's how they changed it, and I think they can have beards now too, which is, I mean, progress. You can they tolerate a little bit more things, maybe a little more marginally progressive. So I feel like administrators had a lot of power in our school comparatively to Kristen's school. You said that students at your school actually got a teacher fired, right?
Yeah, they got my favorite Spanish teacher fired.
And what did she didn't have anything serious against her, right? Like nothing like that would get her in trouble in like the court of law.
No, I don't think so. I think she said a few things. She's a very blunt woman, so she said whatever she thought. And then she was also very strict. So if students were messing around or they weren't doing what she thought they were supposed to be doing, she would say it, and she wouldn't sugarcoat anything. And so it made a lot of students hate her.
And then they just complained and got her fired?
Yeah, they all signed a petition, and they talked to the principal, and they got her fired.
That's interesting. I feel like if, for example, if Mr. Hurley taught in San Francisco, they would have gotten him fired. He was a grouch. I loved him, but he was a grouch.
Why would he do?
He would yell at people, and he would send like 6 students to student services at once for having a little bit of stubble like on their face, and then like half of them would get sent back with student services saying, no, you're fine, you can just shave tomorrow. And it was just, I don't know, he was very like, put the hammer down. He threw out a girl for sleeping in class, and she wouldn't like stop like putting her, you know, head on in her hand. Yeah, he sent her to student services, and he sent me after her with the pink slip saying what she did wrong, and it was like defiance. I swear.
Oh my god. And you liked her?
Yeah, he wrote me a letter of rec. It was great. It was like 2 pages too.
No, but it's interesting when you talk about like things that people can or can't say. Like I remember one of the teachers, Miss Robles, and then the Spanish teachers, she was really mortified. She had a Spanish accent, and she tried to say beach, and she was teaching playa, and then next thing you know, everyone like heard the wrong thing, and then next thing you know, she's getting sent a bunch of emails talking about misappropriately speaking in class. And
oh my god,
yeah.
Just for her accent saying beach?
Yeah,
that's so sad.
Yeah, a lot of times things like that happen, or like, you know, they would make you sign a waiver at the beginning of the year so teachers wouldn't get in trouble for showing certain movies.
Oh yeah, they did have to approve the movies. I do remember that. Yeah, I feel like in general breaching wasn't tolerated. There was this kid at, I think it was junior year, last day of school, he decided, you know, let's have some fun. So during passing period, he took a boombox, he stood on the stairs where most of the students would see him and they walk, and he played Gangnam Style, and he started dancing to it, and by the time half the day was over, the administrators caught him and made him stop. And what did they do to him, Harsimran?
They gave him, I forget how many hours.
I feel like a couple,
hours.
like 100 or 200 hours of community service for dancing on the stairs during passing period on the last day of school.
I told you about my high school senior prank, right? We unleashed a bunch of baby chicks into the campus.
Oh.
Our teachers loved it.
Wow. God, I feel like it's so different in what you're allowed to do. You broke the social norms, but it was okay because it was fun. At our school, fun was not allowed, apparently.
Yeah, I've told you this before. I feel like my school was really big on self-expression. And I remember one girl, one of my friends, she was particularly mad because she drew a painting of, like, male genitals. And her friend drew one of female genitals. But my principal took down the female genitalia.
Really?
Yeah, so then she started a company where she made vagina stickers and passed them around and stuck them all over campus.
She would have gotten expelled.
Could you imagine if like somebody did something like the vagina monologues at Clovis North?
Expelled, or at least suspended, and then if she didn't stop, expelled.
Yeah, and then she wrote an article in the school newspaper too, and then the principal apologized to her.
Expelled.
Oh my god. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I just things were different. Even your school was more progressive, even in the sense that you were allowed to use your phones during class sometimes, as long as it wasn't like ridiculous, right?
Yeah,
during
within
a group
reason.
activity or something within reason, you could have your phone out. At our school, we couldn't have our phone out from the first bell to the last bell. So if
we even had Twitter activities. We would post on Twitter.
oh yeah, wow. Even at our school, during lunch, if you were caught in the cafeteria with your phone, they would take it from you and make you pick up everyone else's trash before giving it back, and then they told you not to use it again.
And they could still send you to student services.
Yeah, they could still send you to student services.
Oh, really?
Yeah, student services was the place they sent you to if there was any infraction of anything.
Anything, really, anything.
Like
you didn't shave, you
have your phone out, you're not in dress code.
Yeah, your phone out.
You're
that was
defiant to a teacher, you get into a fight with another student, you smoke, I don't know, you do anything that...
Anything.
I feel like my middle school rules were more relaxed than your high schools.
Wow.
And my middle school is a normal public school.
Like, you can even have tattoos that are visible, for example. Or, like...
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, like, it just became kind of an issue because a lot of people, for example... there are a lot of Indians or Punjabi who are Sikh, and then
they had the henna?
Well, no, in Sikhism, you can't cut your hair.
Oh,
for those
I
who are
see.
really devout, and so people would get sent to student services.
For not cutting your hair.
Yeah, so then they had to, then the school made an exception thing where they had to get a special note from a religious leader. And it was like, what people had to go through so much of an effort to, like, get past whatever the dress code rules were. And it was kind of a nuisance, and so, like, you had to get a doctor's. I remember my cousin... Beer, like, he had to go to the doctors and he had to tell them, because Beer's facial hair and body hair grew really fast, and so he had to get the doctor's note saying that he gets uncomfortable when he shaves too often because it creates a rash on his skin, for the school to let him keep his facial hair. Yeah.
Kristen just sitting there horrified. Running a little short on time, so I think I'm going to switch to the topic of diversity. Kristen, you mentioned that at your high school, it was 20%. Could you explain that?
Yeah, so it was 20% everything. It was 20% Asian, 20% African American, 20% white, 20% Latin American, and then 20% students with learning disabilities.
That's pretty interesting. We had a program for students with learning disabilities, but it was not 20%. I think there were probably 10 of them total in the school or something like that. At our school, it was over 50% white, and I think the demographic is also different in the sense that Fresno as a whole, it has, I looked this up on the 2010 census, it's like 12.6% Asian, whereas in San Francisco it's like 33.3%. So we did have a lot fewer Asian students, and I think we had a lot of Latinos. I think in Fresno we have a large population of Latinos, and
the agriculture.
I feel like our school did have a lot less diversity. Growing up in my private school is pretty funny. My 8th grade graduating class of 7 people had one Indian girl, and then the rest were all white, including me because I'm Middle Eastern and the government says I'm white, so I'm white, I guess. And I never had an African American or I guess black of any kind instructor until I got to college, and I had that one French GSI. Corinne, yeah. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah, all of my teachers from kindergarten to 8th grade were white, except for the one Indian geography teacher and 2 Hispanic PE teachers, and that's it. And it was kind of interesting because we watched this documentary in sociology called The American Promise, and I think it was in New York. These 2 boys attended this prestigious private school, and there were very few African American students, and they felt kind of out of their element, and the teachers, a lot of them were white, and I think it was pretty uncomfortable for them. But in my school, there were no black teachers. I think there was at least 1 at that school. And did you have a diverse population of teachers, would you say?
Yeah, I had a lot of, diversity in teachers and their, like, ethnic races, and also, like, sexualities. Like, I had a lot of gay or LGBTQ teachers, and I also had a lot of, like, heterosexual teachers.
How are you
And
aware?
they were very open about it. They would say, oh, I'm getting married to my wife, blah, 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 or, like, my wife and I, or they would just say it. It was never hidden or kept from us. Everyone just knew.
That never happened at our school. I
didn't know if anyone...
we didn't know. We suspected for, like, 1 teacher and maybe 1 counselor. But other than that, we had no idea. There was no way anyone was going to be open about this.
Oh, yeah. Like first day introductions. So you get to know your teachers. You're like, oh, yeah, so my wife and I Or like my fiance, she and I just got engaged. Or like,
Wow.
yeah. And then,
So you had a higher percentage of African American students at your school than Berkeley does, right?
Yeah.
If it's 20%, that's a lot.
yeah.
That's higher than the actual population, or at least of America probably.
Oh,
but
is it real? Oh, I didn't know.
I think that's I'm not gonna say for sure, but that's pretty interesting. You mentioned something about tests for getting to AP classes. You want to talk about that?
So at my high school, there was this big issue that the teachers were having with, just in general, because there were not enough Latin American students or African American students in our AP classes. And part of that was because in order to get into an AP class at such a small high school, you had to get tested. So that means you needed letter of recs, you needed teacher recommendations, you needed to fill out your GPA and grades for all your other classes, and you needed to take a test. And for like US history or literature classes, you had to write essays. And then so teachers had such a big problem that there wasn't enough diversity in those classes. It was mostly Asian or white. And so now at my high school, they've gotten rid of the tests.
To promote diversity.
That's
pretty interesting. I mean, we didn't
Yeah.
have tests. We had like one test to get into Honors Algebra 2, and I think that's pretty much it. Because otherwise your teachers would just do it wasn't really even a recommendation. They would say, what class are you taking next year? And you're like, Honors Chemistry. And they're like, okay, unless you were failing a class. So, yeah, that's pretty interesting. I think our AP classes, I mean, they were as diverse as the students. I mean,
I think it depended on the class.
It depended on the class,
for
definitely.
example, my AP Chem class, there was only one white person. All of us were Indian and Asian. Yeah. So I think it depends on the type of class. But then because our school didn't restrict people with the exam, like in AP US History, we had over 182 students.
Yeah, there were a lot.
And
then like AP Psychology as well had a lot of people. Those were the easy classes. It had like a lot of the cheerleaders and stuff. I don't know.
I forgot to tell you this. My high school, my teachers actually sent us a survey to ask us how we felt, the AP students, to ask us how we felt about the lack of diversity in our classes.
Really?
We never had that.
No.
Yeah.
I feel like the only thing that ever promoted diversity was they had the student clubs for like, the different cultures, and then they had one like multicultural rally every year where people would go dance, and they would introduce the clubs, and they say, this is the Armenian club, now they're going to do a dance for you, and then they leave. that was the extent of our diversity. I feel like it shows that even like the way that they taught American history at your school, it did promote inclusivity a lot more than anything that our school ever did, I would say. So I know we mentioned a little bit about LGBTQ stuff when we talked about the teachers not being able to like openly express things like that at our school, Harsimran, but I feel like this is going to come as kind of a loaded statement, but I do believe that it's true. I feel like in our community, it was probably more acceptable to express your disapproval of a gay person than to be gay. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah.
I feel like that's one of the biggest differences from back home to here. And I would obviously like to see that change because that's pretty terrible.
Mm-hmm. I think especially when like in high school, a lot of people used to use the word gay just to call something like bad or feminine.
Oh yeah.
It's like, oh my god, that's so gay or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I think like that's a big example of how people could say things like that and it would be okay versus for someone to come out and then be shunned by the rest of the school. I remember a lot of people who were gay, who were lesbian, they ended up dropping out of Clovis North due to bullying, and then they wound up going to online school.
Oh, yeah. I didn't know that. I actually never even knew any of those people.
I knew them because I participated in drama.
Drama. Yeah, because I feel like there were none of those people in the AP classes because I took almost like all the AP classes that were the mainstream like important things, and like there was one guy who's my acquaintance who is gay, and then that's pretty much it. I feel like there was an LGBTQ club on campus, but I don't think it was very active. I saw like one poster. They didn't have any like events or like anything to promote like inclusivity. But I feel like at your school it's probably very active, right?
Yeah, when you walked into my high school, the first board that you saw was a board with a bunch of teachers and students' faces and why they supported the GSA, the Gay Straight Alliance. And so, yeah, we did a lot of activities. The GSA always sent out, like, surveys asking us how we felt about things and asking us, like, for quotes or whatever, showing that we supported them. And then, what else did we do? I think I don't remember anything.
Was there ever any time where people in your high school, like people dressed in drag or anything like that?
People dressed in drag? Oh,
yeah.
There was this one day where we were allowed to wear, like, there was, I think, 2 dress-up weeks a year. There was one day where we were allowed to dress up as Disney characters, and one student actually got thrown out of class because their costume is too distracting. It wasn't even revealing. It was just a Cheshire Cat costume, and Lindstrom threw her out of class.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Can you believe it?
I've heard of all people.
Actually, I just remembered. So you know how you were talking about how people were saying, like, oh, that's so gay, blah, blah, blah.
Uh-huh.
My principal made it a point because he heard students saying, you're a faggot. And he was like, he had a very long, like, 2-hour speech in front of the entire school telling us why we cannot use derogatory terms like that anymore.
Wow.
It was kind of shocking for me because I didn't use those terms anyways, so I sat there and I did my homework. But it was very emotional. I think he cried at one point.
That's, wow. Cool. So, I'm just going to give like a little bit of an overview, and then we're going to move to questions. So I think, all in all, it seems that maybe our schooling in Fresno was more traditional than yours. I think our school was just resistant to change in general. Like, American history is taught in the traditional way. Very white-centric, I guess. It didn't do a lot of the things that yours did to promote more inclusive school environment, I would say. Your curriculum and even social norms, I feel like they reflect the changing society where it's more acceptable to be this or to be whoever you are, really. And yeah, so our school was pretty restrictive and traditional. Our dress code reflected, that our community was pretty conservative, and the school just didn't tolerate deviating behavior.
From the norm. Yeah,
from the norm. You would just breaching, you're punished always, pretty much. Now that we're in Berkeley, it feels different to me for, I guess, a few reasons. I'm just going to talk about a couple of them. I mean, the student demographic difference it's not a big deal. It's not like, oh my god, the people are so different here, I feel sad. It's like, I mean, it's fine, it's just different. One thing that was interesting, though, is that I feel like I'm a little surprised at how this school assumes your political leanings. Just because, like, at Clovis North, it was socially conservative, but I would say it was politically neutral. So, even if there were a lot of politically conservative people in the community, I don't think any teachers ever pushed an agenda either way. There was this one teacher, our AP government teacher, he was like, maybe at the end of the year, like, after the school is done, you can ask me, like, what side I support, but I'm not going to tell you now. I feel like our teachers were not allowed to discuss politics like that in any way. They weren't allowed to say what they really believed, which is interesting, but I guess it protects neutrality. I don't know. It's not like that here at all.
It's not like that here at all.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just going to make things clear right now. I'm not a Trump supporter, but I am not as liberal as a lot of people here. And so in SBUM 50 AC last year, it's an American Cultures class, talked a lot about racism and things like that. So, I mean, it wasn't like, it was just talking about trees, and then the professor started pushing his agenda or something. But, like, I don't know. The 2 days after the election, the two whole lectures after the election, he was complaining and ranting and putting the class open for, like, do you want to share your feelings? And I don't know, it was just kind of, like, I'm paying to learn about the environment, and I guess, like, it has to do with American cultures, I guess, in a way, but I don't know, writing ignorance and hatred on the board, and selfishness, and then sitting on the stage moping, and, like, that's just not, I feel like that's inappropriate to me. I don't know. Because obviously not everyone in the class feels the same way, and then to be paying money to see that was great. Yeah, I don't know. To me, Berkeley can be a little alienating at times just because I feel like a lot of the people here would look at my neighbors or look at my teachers and probably hate them. And I don't know. It's weird. So, very short on time. This is longer than I thought it would be, but I'm going to do some questions now. So, Har Simran, this is for you. It's about that class, SBIM 50AC. We did talk a lot about institutional racism, and I was wondering if that class altered your views on race in any way, and how did that perspective presented in that class compared to the attitudes of people in Fresno, just in general?
So yeah, I took SBIM 50AC over the summer during one of the summer sessions with Professor Kenneth Worthy, and I think it had a huge impact on me just because I think in Fresno, like at least in my education, the way I perceive black people and black people in my courses, people were always the same. Like, oh, just another one of my classmates. You could be white, you could be Asian, you could be black. It didn't matter. But I think after taking SBIM 50AC and then analyzing sort of the situation in Hurricane Katrina, where you had people who are white and black who were who were trying to gather resources while their homes were being destroyed, and you had black people being considered as people who were looting, whereas white people were just protecting themselves or say defending themselves.
They were finding groceries.
Exactly. And so I think that that sort of imagery and sort of the discussions we had in SBIM 50AC really shed light on institutional racism and how there's an inherent discrepancy in power between people who are white versus people who are black. And I think that was really apparent when we had discussions on slavery and how the Constitution was formed, and then how there's always been this sort of gap. And I think then after taking the class, and I had discussions with my family and friends about those sorts of issues, and it was interesting because we would talk about issues like, okay, so why are black communities faced in these sort of problems of poverty, or why are these problems in sort of like drugs or those sorts of things? And I remember talking to one of my most conservative friends who was telling me, well, it's because they want it, like they're just like that. If the dads didn't just leave the houses and the moms would take care of their families and they would send their kids to school and they actually had a desire to learn, they would actually do better. And I was absolutely shocked because, not only did I not share those beliefs, but also after taking SBIM 50AC and then realizing sort of how there's been this inherent discrepancy in power, I realized that, you can't generalize people like that, and you can't just say it's because they don't want to. It's because of how society has made it so that they've always been in this position where they've had a lot less opportunities. And so I think, in light of that class, there are a lot of things that I've come to understand better. Like, for example, the idea of affirmative action, or the idea of trying to push people without power to have better access to power. And I know that a lot of people at our school who I've spoken with after are upset by that because they're like, the idea of can you be poor and white versus poor and black, and who deserves more resources? And I think after taking SBIM 50AC, you realize that it's the black person who deserves more because there's a lot more biases and stereotypes that are focused on them that a white person wouldn't have to endure. So I think that in institutional sort of racism, I think that it is present in society. And prior, I would have never thought of it because, like I said, I thought of everyone as equal in my classes. But then, to realize that, no, maybe it's not 100% equal and that there are discrepancies.
I would say that, yeah, in sociology we did talk about how America is a very individualistic society. So if something goes wrong, it's your fault. You blame the individual. You don't blame the institutions that got them there and put them at an inherent disadvantage from the time they were born. They have what we call ascribed characteristics, just things that you're born with. You're a woman, you're black, you're born into a poor family. There's nothing you can do about that. I mean, obviously you can rise up, but is it harder? Yeah, a lot harder. And I feel like that is an important thing to recognize. That's good. Do you think that high schools in Fresno will ever become like high school, the Christian's high school? Will they ever catch up, really, or will they always be behind?
In my personal opinion, I think it'll take a lot of time for Fresno to become more progressive. Although California is a democratic state, I think, and there are a lot of Democrats in Fresno, at the same time, there's this notion of what should be, how things should be, and I think that's really strong in Fresno. Like, I remember reading about a parent club that was created just to stop sorts of changes from happening.
Wow.
Like, for example, like the issue of having gender-neutral bathrooms. Like, in Fresno, there were a group of parents who wanted that not to happen. So I think, like, as long as there's people like that who are willing, people who have money, like these people, like, I remember, for example, I tutored a boy, and his mom was always at the country club playing tennis and yeah, exactly. And so I think, like, as long as people like that are willing to, like, push for, like, willing to fight against change, I think that it's likely not going to happen in the near future.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, question for Kristen. So, Harsim and I have told you a lot of stories about Fresno. You've actually been to Fresno. We told you all about our schooling. You didn't get to experience that, but you did get to experience a little bit of the community where we grew up. So, besides it being really hot there, what shocked you the most compared to the community where you were raised, and maybe what institutions were responsible for making it so that maybe you didn't think like that, you had different values and you followed different norms,
I think when I was actually in Fresno, the only thing I really noticed was, like, the demographics were different. Yeah, that was the only thing I really noticed, but I've met some of Harsimran's more conservative friends, and, like, I've heard them talking to you as well, and I feel like it's mostly their comments that kind of shock me. Like, if someone is pro-life or someone is, like, for example, I think one of your friends made comments about Chinese people. I was sitting right there. But, like, making generalizations, saying things like, oh, Chinese people, they just don't know that. It's not their culture. They're just rude because that's their culture. And they don't know how to behave in American society. And then things like that kind of shock me. Like, I realized that she's not trying to be rude or derogatory towards Chinese people. Like, she's trying her best to understand. But it's also, it made me kind of speechless. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. What about the institutions that kind of you think shaped your beliefs the most?
I feel that my family is already pretty open-minded. Like, for example, my mom's parents, they've only been here for, 2 years, and my grandma and my grandpa are both, very supportive of the LGBTQ community.
Aww.
More so than I expected from them. And then, yeah, my parents have always been very open-minded people. And then, I guess, my school, my education, all of my teachers have been extremely open about everything. They won't tell you exactly what their political leanings are, but you knew.
You knew.
You knew what they were. So, yeah, that was always really interesting. I guess my teachers always also assumed that I was very liberal, but it was true too, so I didn't mind. But yeah, it was just all liberal, coming from all ways. And my mom's friends too. My mom had friends who were LGBTQ. It was just very, I think one time Harsimran asked me, he was like, do you know anyone who grew up with lesbian or gay parents? And I was like, yeah, my mom's friends with lesbian parents.
I didn't know anyone. Do you?
Not until I came here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, I went to their house.
I actually still don't. Not that I know of. That's interesting. Yeah. So I think that's all we have time for. I'm sorry this is so long, if you managed to get to the end. But thank you guys so much for your time, and I hope this was informative. I think it was a good discussion on how our schools are very different, and maybe they've led us to think differently about things.